Welcome to the Beyond Physio podcast, where we help you move, excel, and inspire others on your journey to your next level with knowledge and advice from experts and testimonials from our like-minded community. Welcome to the Beyond Physio podcast. Today, my guest is new friend, Dr. Harold Hong, who is one of the medical directors over at New Waters Recovery Center in Raleigh.
That's right.
Dr. Harold, welcome to our show.
Thanks, Jerry. So good to be here, man.
Yeah, absolutely. We have a lot to talk about, but before we go into things, Harold, can you talk more about your background? Because it's the journey that got you to where you are right now. Very curious. So why don't you elaborate on some of that? Because you've been through here and there and back and whatnot.
Yeah, true. I'll just start with kind of sharing a little bit about what things look like now, and then I can kind of talk about how things got to where we are. So I am a practicing general adult psychiatrist here in Raleigh. But I think what makes my practice a little bit different is a real focus on human development and thinking holistically about people, with a really strong emphasis on understanding our family of origin and how that set us up to show up the way we've shown up as adults. There are areas in which I think this shows up in a really interesting way is working with patients that are recovering from addiction, be it from a substance or a process. And then also working with individuals who are dealing with like really serious depression and anxiety, and trying to understand the root cause of how this came up. I think what got me interested in this is just my own personal story, to be pretty frank. I went through medical school, psychiatric residency, and most of the training is focusing on your molecules, right? So like serotonin, dopamine, histamine, what are all the ways that we can manipulate these molecular balances through medications or somatic therapies like electroconvulsive therapy or transcranial magnetic stimulation. And I think what I saw is people get a little bit better, but it's not reasonable to expect that your patients are going to stop being your patients, right? Like, they're going to stay on some type of like maintenance medication for the unforeseeable future, or probably decades. And throughout that process, I got really curious about like, why does healthcare function this way? Like, why are we so focused on medications? Why does healthcare actually look more like disease management rather than health creation? Okay.
I'm so glad you said that, because I feel like a lot of the times in medicine, allopathic in particular, it is really about management more than it is health creation, and more than it is, there's healthcare practices that focus on wellness, of course, but I feel like by and large, even nowadays, it's really about management and keeping people maybe in pain or sickness to some degree too.
Oddly enough, I totally sympathize with what you're saying. It's a strange world. Like, there's like this explicit mission of like health and healing and wholeness, but most people's experience of healthcare is, I'm just going to kind of grind on disease management.
Yeah.
And there's a real disconnect between like the explicit vision and like the implicit reality of how most people are experiencing healthcare. So I was very curious about this. Like, this is a huge business, like trillions of dollars, like going into healthcare. And I was very curious, like, what is going on here at like the deepest level? And my curiosity led me to actually working for a very high-level management consulting company. So I took a 2-year pause from my clinical job as a psychiatrist, and I became an associate management consultant.
Amazing.
At McKinsey.
Many talents you are.
and I totally underestimated how much Excel and PowerPoint I would be doing. I've gone on to be very thankful for learning how to do those things. But part of my work was going really, really deep into the private equity like investment world and also the insurance world of how healthcare is financed. And it was it was very revealing in seeing how everyone is trying to do their best. Like everyone is trying and they are genuine, but the unique confluence of all these different industries, it just kind of levels out to create the situation that we're in right now. So when you're talking about how do you deliver like very rigorous, scientifically based interventions to a huge population of people through a very small set of providers who are highly trained, it's actually really difficult. It's just really difficult to do it. It's really difficult to do it at scale.
Yeah.
And on top of that, I think, what got me really excited about our initial conversations, Jerry, is you think differently about PT. So, I think if you bring a group of different physical therapists into a room and I ask you, what does good physical therapy look like? Or what does a good physical therapy business look like? I know like there's many different answers to that question.
Sure.
Right. And it just so happens to be the case that most of us begin our careers believing that we have to work with insurance companies. And insurance companies have their vision of what good healthcare looks like. And if you want to work in a partnership, you need to have a shared vision of what a good healthcare is going to look like. But the great thing about being in this country is you can be creative, you can be entrepreneurial. And if you have a different vision of healthcare and you can create a place for people to be your customers, then you can try it out. Yeah. And I think, to the testament and like the testimonials of the patients that you've been working with, you're doing really great work here.
Oh, thank you. Appreciate that.
Yeah.
It's awesome. So then let's carry through the journey. So you went through that whole stint with this high management company.
Yeah.
And you decided to go back into medicine at that point.
Yeah. Well, I mean, funny enough, what really happened there is I had no idea that I would be working as much as I was working. So we're talking 200 nights a year in a hotel, minimum like 80 hours a week. Like if you go to bed before 12 or like wake up after 7, people on your team will like question your commitment to their project. It's like standard, like 5-6 hours is like a good solid hardworking person's sleep per day. And I totally burned out. I just 100%
believe it.
No doubt about it. I burned out. And I think that was actually God's way of talking to me, saying it's time to take a step back and see the big picture.
Reevaluate things.
Yeah. And by working with an individual therapist, she recommended that I go to this 1-week program in Tennessee called Onsite.
Yeah.
And it was a revelation to me in understanding like the things that I thought made me strong were actually my greatest vulnerability, right? Like my drive to achieve, my drive to like just nail things in terms of like finding the right answer, the best answer. They were just coming from a disordered understanding of like how this fits into healthy living. And it just completely, I felt like I woke up and for the first time, like my feet were on the ground and I was like seeing myself realistically.
Wow.
And I mean, this had a lot to do with doing a deep dive into my history.
Yeah.
And it just created such a passion, like reigniting my passion for working with patients. And then with this new mindset of what good mental health care looks like, I started to do a private practice. And my first set of patients were like young adults at Duke. And it was incredible sharing like these new frameworks with them. And, previously they had been told like, you just have depression, here's your antidepressants. And no one had talked to them about like, where did you learn these deep-seated rules about like needing to tolerate anxiety, like needing to tolerate doing things you don't naturally feel passionate about being with people that you don't feel good connection with, but feel compelled to be, and going for jobs that you don't feel make sense to you at a very deep level. Like all this thinking, like where is this coming from? And inevitably, a lot of it comes from the family of origin.
Mm-hmm.
And it's fascinating, and it's so exciting to see people who are able to take this thinking up, find real friends, explore the world, like take risks, find a career path that energizes them, and all with like very little medication.
That's amazing.
It's
Do you
great.
feel that, having had this revelation through Onsite, and that's been powerful actually, and I want to go into it a little bit too,
Yeah.
Harold, but do you feel that the exposure of some of these young Duke students, for example, because of their family history, sounds like, and the stuff that happens in the family culture, did that actually cause these kids to not have the sort of resources and maybe the opportunities to explore outside of sort of this path that was set before them?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's more about it's a very similar thing to me. It's like the things that make me conventionally successful were also making me like emotionally, psychologically, relationally not successful. Right? So like, let's see, like I'm just trying to think of like a really powerful story is I had this client, and he felt so driven to get straight A's, right? And he would just kill himself to get straight A's. And it's really curious, like, where is this drive coming from? And so we went back and talked about, like, when was the first time you felt so excited about getting good grades? And he talked about how it was like when he was in elementary school. He came back with like a really good test score, and his dad, who was struggling with drug addiction and was frequently gone for like weeks at a time on these benders, got so excited about these good grades that he took him to the mall, and they had this awesome time together. And, then that night ended. Dad disappeared. The next time report cards came in, he runs up to his dad, like, Dad, look at my grades. And he's like, this is awesome, kid. And go to the mall, have a great time.
Positive reinforcement.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
And then but we just took a step back. I said, like, do you think it was right that you only got that when those grades happened? Right? And just started crying.
Oh, my God. That's
like,
really tough.
It's like, no, man, like that kid deserved that love every day.
Yeah.
Not just on report card day.
Yeah.
Right?
Definitely.
And so now that we've like realistically separated appreciating yourself, valuing yourself, and the grades that you get, it's a completely different mindset on like, well, do I want to kill myself to get straight A's this quarter? Or do I want to, and why am I killing myself? Like now this person has a choice to get straight A's because they love the material.
Yeah.
Right. Because like their curiosity can be like awakened and set free. It's not about a deep false affirmation of your self-worth.
Yeah.
Right. So just like little questions like that, little different perspectives. It's amazing how that can just shift your thinking. And this is at the end of the day what I think is so pivotal about any person's human development is to learn like realistic rules for healthy living and how to apply those rules in a healthy way. And the thing is, really, like, it's your caregivers, your parents are your most important teachers growing up. And unfortunately, everyone is imperfect. So there's no such thing as a perfect person, and therefore there's no such thing as a perfect parent. So everyone will have at least some work to do to figure things out for themselves. And I'm so happy for the people who are like young adults who finally are awakening to this responsibility. Like, I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it now when I'm 20. But when I was at Onset, I was there with people who were retired, 65, and they're only doing that then.
Yeah. Wow. Can you talk more about that Onset program and how you fell into it and whatnot?
Yeah, sure. So Onsite is this world-renowned residential treatment center in Cumberland Furnace, Tennessee. It's about an hour outside of Nashville, and it's highly regarded in the therapy community. So many therapists will work with patients, and they'll see that, this program will be really good for you. And you go there, you go to the website, you apply. They accept pretty much everyone, provided that they're not like actively in addiction or actively in like a severe mental health crisis. Like, the door is pretty wide open for people. And what makes Onsite really special is it uses an experiential approach of psychotherapy. So traditional psychotherapy almost looks like Socratic dialogue, right? Like, I just ask you questions, you give me answers.
Sure.
It's super cognitive, okay? And it's really talking about principles, like right, wrong, stories like this happened and this happened. It's like very linear in its approach. Experiential psychotherapy is anything that involves like a creative element. So there's frequently drawing, you'll take like a red scarf and then you'll just put it over your shoulders and you'll take on a different persona. So like if there might be a bunch of scarves on the table and you might say like, Harold, choose a scarf that talks about how you're feeling today. And let's say I'm having a bad day, I'm going to pick the red scarf.
Yeah.
And I'd say, okay, like, tell me what this red scarf means to you. And like, this is like my anger. Okay. And then, okay, Harold, I want to have a conversation with Harold's anger. Okay. Okay. And so, put this on. And so I'll put this on. Okay. Now I'm not Harold, I'm Harold's anger.
Okay.
And then we'll have a dialogue. When did you first meet? Right. And,
Wow.
instead of me being like, I'm really pissed about this guy that cut me off on the road today, I say, we first met when Harold was 8 years old. Right. And then
I like that.
you're like zooming back in time.
Wow.
And a lot of me and like many other participants, like we have like traveled back in time, and now we're 8 years old. And so this is an incredibly efficient way of doing psychotherapy, because I'm not trying to prompt you, and you suddenly, have this light bulb moment. Like, as a skilled therapist, they will say, I think this anger started somewhere in the past, and I need to know where it started and how do they develop their connection with each other. And it is incredibly powerful and efficient way of getting at like these deep insights about how you've shown up this way.
That's so curious.
And there's also a lot of psychoeducation to it. So, I'm really interested in your work because I don't think I ever learned like what it means to be physically healthy other than eat your vegetables.
That's right.
Like no one, like very, like growing up, my parents, like they grew up in like post-war Korea, and like the idea of like exercising, it's like, didn't really make sense. Like we're just happy to have food.
Yeah.
And, they definitely don't have enough protein to do like a strength program. Right.
My parents either back in the day, you're right.
So it was like rare. Like I didn't know any of my parents or parents' friends or aunts and uncles that exercised. Like that was just not on the radar at all.
Yeah, it wasn't for us either.
Yeah.
And it's funny because if I were to take two steps back in our conversation, like I feel like our culture and the way I grew up was dominated by how well I did in school. So very
Yes.
performance-based kind of thing.
Yes.
And to sort of mirror what your one client went through, for me, I felt like unless I got certain grades, I would have to face some sort of either comparison to another Korean kid who was probably on his or her way to Harvard. And obviously, I could not compete at that level intellectually, or I felt like I couldn't. And because of that, it definitely had some self-esteem, created some self-esteem issues in myself and some self-value. So I felt that unless I get this or do this well here, whatever I do is not going to be meaningful for my parents to receive their love. And that definitely was, it was scarring for a long time.
Totally.
Oh my gosh.
Totally.
And I think for me, on a health point, that actually got me, I think, into emotional eating. And when I was stressed out, I felt comfort from eating a lot, which is why I was heavier as a kid. Likely, there was definitely some dopamine release being from having all these good foods, and whatnot. But it definitely, and that's how I dealt with it. Other kids that I knew dealt with it using drugs and other kinds of things. So maybe for me, an addiction was for food, whereas the other kids were addiction towards substances and other kinds of other forms of gaining pleasure. So
totally. And so I think this is at a very deep level how. Like a key idea about how people grow up is we learn from the things we're told explicitly, like get good grades, right? But we also learn the rules of life from all these like implicit things, right? Yeah. So if like this safe, calm, comforting time of the day is meals. That might be the only time of the day where you're gonna like have quality time with a caregiver,
right?
And the only time you see them smile is when you're wolfing down the chica that they made for you.
Absolutely, yeah.
I have a similar experience, and I just remember. I can't tell you how many like hundreds of times my parents would tell me this story about how meat was so rare. Okay. And so like we would go to steakhouses like all the time, and like they would tell us every single time this story about how they had this 1 ounce of beef and they were so excited about it. And then my uncle ate all of it himself in one bite and it created this huge fight. Okay. They would always tell me a story, and like, so steak will forever hold like a very special place in my heart because it was like a special time for the family to like eat beef. And my parents like there was something really, they were proud and happy and content that they could provide that for us as kids. So that creates like a very powerful role for me in my subconscious thinking about food and pleasing other people, right?
Exactly.
Like the only time that I'm like reliably going to like get connection with the caregivers is like at meals, and like they're going to be telling me to eat a lot.
Right.
So getting back to the on-site thing, like a lot of recovery from depression and anxiety includes relearning fundamentals of like what does good emotional health look like, right? Like just like you and I never heard explicit rules about like, what does good physical health look like. I think even more rare is like what does good emotional health look like, right? I mean, like a very common situation for like people who like are like us, like second, third generation survivors of the Korean War. It's like if you're not dying and you're not starving, you are good.
Yes.
Right? Like, what do you have to cry about?
Right.
Like my parents tell me stories.
The big deal?
Yeah, it's like we were so hungry. Like, like they're literally telling me stories about like hiding in caves and stuff. Like, yeah.
Oh man.
So my mom's family started up in like now modern day North Korea, and they were running away.
Oh yeah, exactly.
From the communists. So they ran all the way to the south.
Wow, that's incredible. That reminds me of my parents telling me how my dad in particular, where there were times they'd actually have to walk barefoot in the snow to get to class because they had so little shoe on left on their sneakers or whatever they were wearing for footwear. But it's funny because in some sense I would feel some guilt too when they would tell me that. So I'm like, okay, so am I supposed to feel bad about what I have then? It was a very tricky time to kind of understand my emotions too growing up. Like, well, I don't know how to feel about this now. So I was very confused at times.
Yeah, totally. So at Onsite, in any good treatment program, you're going to do like therapeutic work focused on yourself and your history, and you will learn fundamentals of like what does good emotional health look like. So things like mindfulness, like what does mindfulness mean? What are boundaries? Like why are boundaries important? There's a really interesting condition in the therapy world called codependency. Like what is codependency? Why is it important? Like, do you have it? If you have it, how do you recover from it?
Can you dive into codependency? Because it's a curious topic for me.
Yeah? If I may, like, tell me more about your curiosity about codependency.
So my understanding of it is that you almost need to have someone in your life fulfill some emotional part of you that you don't have. And without that person, you don't feel complete in an unhealthy kind of way. But I could be wrong about that definition.
No. That's right. So that thinking is super common. Like it's a very normal way to be in this culture. And in like my group of therapy friends, we call it like the Jerry Maguire, right? Remember that movie?
Yes.
Right, where Tom Cruise is like, "You complete me."
Yes.
Okay, and it was crazy because I remember seeing that movie, and I remember like all of my friends and stuff in youth group, like we all saw that movie, and like everyone thought like this is love, right? Like this is what a good relationship looks like. Okay, but in the therapy community, we would say that's awful. It's so dysfunctional. Like that, there's like you could not be more wrong about intimacy, okay, than the Jerry Maguire thing. So I think it's a big question the way I hear it though, because codependency is it's actually like a very common word now, like TikTok, Instagram, like you'll see people talk about codependency. And you'll hear a lot of people say like, oh, like, like so-and-so is so codependent. They'll say stuff like that. And a lot of what people key in on that phrase is the word dependent. Okay. And they think like, oh, they're so needy, right?
Yeah.
Like needy people are codependent.
Right.
which to me is a clear sign that this person does not understand what the word originally meant. Okay, so like codependency has evolved, and the way that people talk about it in social media is so different from what it originally meant. So interesting, Onsite, I can't remember the woman's name, but it was created by a woman who created the term codependency.
No way.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
So the word codependency began at Onsite.
Get out.
Okay. Yeah. And so what codependency originally began with is substance abuse treatment programs focusing on chemically dependent individuals. Like that was like how they talked about it.
Yeah.
And what the therapists began to realize is every chemically dependent person had a spouse or like a girlfriend or a boyfriend, like some kind of partner. And the partners of the people who were chemically dependent had a very particular profile. Very common themes being like enabling and being overly responsible for the chemically dependent person.
Oh.
Okay. And so like in their supervision groups, like their treatment planning, it kind of became really too verbally cumbersome to talk about like the spouse of the chemically dependent patient. So what they just shortened it to is the co-chemically dependent. And then that gets shortened to just the codependent.
Interesting.
Okay. Because it was just understood that the chemical was there.
Yeah.
So let's just shorthand it and say codependent. It's shorthand for co-chemical dependent.
Oh.
Yeah. But the way that I would think about it that is consistent with its origin story is essentially a codependent person has this overall state of being where they tend to be under responsible for themselves and over responsible for another person.
Oh, wow.
Okay, so when you are, so if you're the spouse of someone with an alcohol problem, you are like profoundly neglecting your needs for a fully functional spouse. Okay.
Got it. Yeah.
And for some reason, you are trying to take responsibility for your alcoholic spouse's life, right? So like all the times that your alcoholic spouse like doesn't show up for work, gets in trouble with the law, misses something really important for the kids, who's going to swoop in and fill the gap? Right. It's the co-chemically dependent person.
Right.
So like a really interesting thing about codependent people is they tend to be hyper productive individuals, right?
So interesting.
Because they have this strength to keep it together for themselves and another person.
Oh my gosh. Obviously, but this is unhealthy too.
Yeah, I mean it's profoundly unhealthy because part of the way that codependents look for other codependents. And the perfect codependent marriage or relationship is you'll be responsible for my happiness and I'll be responsible for your happiness. Mm-hmm. And you'll make me happy and I'll make you happy. And therefore we have completed each other. Okay. But our ability to anticipate and mind read what the other person needs to be happy is far from perfect. Okay. And so what does someone who can't be responsible for their own happiness do when the person who's supposed to be responsible for their happiness is imperfect?
Oh man.
Right. You experience emotional pain in some way.
For sure.
Right. And whose fault is it?
That's right.
Right. Like from a functional perspective, it's my responsibility, so it's my fault. Mm-hmm. But in our codependent distorted reality, it's actually my partner's fault.
That's great.
And so now I'm pissed.
Yeah.
Right.
You should know me better.
Yeah. How could you?
How could you?
What's wrong with you?
Right.
Well, why? Like, why wouldn't you do that for me? Right. And there's
sense.
No good answers to that question.
No.
Right. And so this intimacy that's like so vital for your well-being is it's messed up for the day.
Yeah.
And when you have two people who don't know how to manage their own feelings, like how do you make a repair? It's very challenging.
Yeah.
So then this leads into this other thing, you know, like forgive and forget. Like that's the only way codependent people know how to fix things is to like bring out the magic eraser. Right.
Slate every day.
Yeah. Right. Like and until the emotional pain and the memory and the history builds up too far.
Oh man.
Right. And then you're just like, you know what? Maybe there's someone else out there who can make me happy.
Oh, yeah. So is there a way to successfully navigate or help people who are codependent become less of that? Do they have to, I would assume that they'd have to go through therapy together and also separately to see that they need to, I guess, be fulfilled on their own in some way and whatnot before they can be successful together.
Like how do you recover from codependency?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, there's actually a lot of great resources out there. So for example, most obviously is find a good therapist.
Yeah.
Okay. But the way that I would like actually, and it's interesting, like the way I'd interview a therapist if I could go back and do it all over again is I would ask them for permission. Mm-hmm. Can I ask you some questions about your history?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. And I would say like, are you in recovery from codependency?
You would ask the therapist?
I would ask them.
Really?
I would ask them. Yes.
You want to know that you want to work with somebody who was going through that then?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And so at the end of the day, like, I think that codependency is actually the inevitable result of like not making up for your parents' imperfections. Okay. So like no parent is perfect. Everyone enters adulthood missing certain like really important emotional health skills about how to be responsible for themselves. Right. Like, I've only recently learned like how important strength training is to my well-being,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like I see myself differently. I see the world differently. I think I feel things more realistically. Like I understand like the importance of doing hard things and then resting from doing hard things.
Right.
And learning from the hard things that I've gone through. Like it's an incredible paradigm for total health.
Yeah.
Okay. So I would say like anyone who hasn't done like an inventory of like what does emotional health skill look like for me and like where are my gaps? If you haven't done that, you're probably experiencing codependency in a real way. And many therapists and healthcare providers in general actually go into this work because they have profound codependency issues of wanting and desiring and needing to be responsible for the well-being of another person.
That's so interesting. I did not know that.
Yes.
Wow.
Yes.
That's mind-blowing, actually.
So there are like a lot of therapists out there who need to be needed by their clients. Okay, this is an unrecovered codependent.
I see.
Okay, but codependency is at the root of emotional pain. So if you work with a therapist who's not recovered from their codependency, they will probably keep you in your codependency. But so they're the worst. They're the most dangerous therapists to work
keep
with.
you wanting to need them is basically.
Yeah.
That's very dangerous.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, because they may not understand like the problematic relationship you're in is the solution to like communicate assertively for the things that you wisely know you need and want to be well. Like that is what a recovered codependent person would do. Someone in codependency will, they may take on the victim role. Like I am the victim of like your negligence. Okay. So the solution to my well-being is you changing. Right.
Yeah.
Or abandon them. Okay. These are, so you can continue in it. You can like try and force them to change, or you can abandon the relationship. But there is like a different option of let's have an emotional problem solving season.
Yeah.
Right. Where like we're going to like understand each other. We're going to like understand ourselves, and we're going to try and co-create like a new way of interacting that's actually emotionally functional for both of us.
Yeah.
Codependent people would be terrified of that approach, right?
Yeah.
Like, oh, like what do you're not even speaking English to me, right? But if you're working with a recovered codependent therapist, they've been roughly in the ballpark where you've been, and they know the path out.
Yeah.
Generally speaking.
Yeah.
So like they can actually, so if someone comes in here and is like, my back is killing me, right? You have
Yes.
the experience.
Yes.
Like I've had back pain.
Yeah.
I've recovered from back pain.
Yeah.
So when they say like, oh, like, I lifted something and like, bang, like I couldn't stand up and I thought I had to go to the hospital immediately. Like, oh, like, yeah, I've been there. I know what that's like.
Exactly.
Yeah. And it's like, all I want to do is lay in bed all day. And you'll know like, okay, maybe for a day, but
Exactly.
if you do that every day, it's not going to get better.
Right,
so
right.
you have the experience, like the practical wisdom of how to get out.
That's really good advice, actually, Harold, because I wouldn't have thought to even ask the therapist where they've been in life.
Yeah.
To see if they even know how to get me out of the situation that I'm in.
Yeah. Yeah.
Powerful. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, but when people recover from codependency, there is like a deep joy that comes from it.
I can imagine.
Yeah.
It reminds me, actually, and I just get a little personal here, but earlier in my career, I felt the need to be needed by my clients. Now, I didn't keep them in payment, obviously, but I felt like I would sort of intentionally reach out, hey, just making sure you're doing okay.
Yes.
But it was actually out of my own fear of not performing at a certain level, which is kind of, now that I think about it, it's like, it's very unhealthy. And then when I look back on 2001 Jerry versus where I am now, it's a very different place because
Yes.
I've put the work in to try to change that mindset. And there are things about myself that I didn't find were healthy that I want to get addressed. So I did those things over time. But it's funny you said those things because it reminded me of that time in my life when I was like that.
Yeah. So how do you think your client work looks different, like now compared to 2001?
Well, I think a couple of things. I think now I'm a lot more confident in who I am, regardless of work, just as a person, because I put the work in and worked with counselors and stuff over time to be happy with who I am, with no matter what I've done. So not performance based.
Yeah.
So being happier about who I am as a person, but also realizing that I can't help everybody. Like I can do all the things I can that magically help other people.
Yeah.
But for Mr. Smith, it just doesn't work. But I don't tie my self-worth to that outcome.
Right.
It just didn't work out, and there must be another option. So whereas before, 25 years ago, I would just be banging my head. Oh my God, it's not getting better. It's my fault. There's this sort of like this self-blame that came along with, which is very unhealthy at the time.
Totally. And I mean, if I were just to kind of expand that out a little bit more, like what I see is you are seeing your gifts and your talents, and you're not afraid of them. Like you're at peace with your gifts and your talents, and instead of like trying to make what makes you work for someone that it's not going to work for, you're not preoccupying their time, and instead you're putting your gifts and your talents that make you to someone who's really going to benefit from it. Right. So I feel like what I see is a professional who's like working to the fullest of their gifting and their talenting, and actually like the community is actually a little bit healthier, right? Because like you are maximizing your fruitfulness. Right.
Yeah, I like that.
So and I think that's like the wonderful thing about recovery from codependency is like not only like are you finding joy in like seeing what makes you like precious and wonderful, that light is shared and more obvious to like the people around you as well.
Yeah, that's powerful. Wow. Let's go to New Waters and tell me more about the program there. I want, because there are a lot of great things going on over there, and I want that to be shared with our community.
Yeah. Thanks, Jerry. So New Waters Recovery is it's a substance abuse detox center. So like we focus on helping people safely stop the use of alcohol, benzos, opiates, like any addictive substance that you need help getting sober from. And we take it much further than that, though, because we not only do we want you to stop using, we recognize that you are emotionally and physically completely depleted from this 5-year run of alcohol use, or this 6-month run of cocaine use, or this 2 months of like really, really intense opiate use. And we recognize that sobriety is merely not using, but you've been using as a way to solve an emotional problem for yourself in an imperfect way.
Yeah.
So your long-term success going forward is going to depend entirely on your ability to find new tools, like new skills, like new ways of seeing yourself, new ways of seeing your stressors. It's a ton of work. Okay. And that's a really tough spot to be in, right? Like my life is in shambles. My body is completely beat up. Like my brain won't turn on. And what it takes for me to get better is to do all this stuff that I'm completely unable to do right now.
Yeah.
It's kind of terrifying.
Yeah.
So what makes New Waters like really special is so many of the people that work there are in recovery from addiction themselves. So just like a good therapist is in recovery from codependency, a good substance use center is filled with people who are in recovery from addiction themselves. So we understand, again, not only do we need to like medically, bring you down from alcohol use, benzo use, opiate use, we need to like physically restore you.
Yeah.
So we have incredible, like nutritious, like shelf prepared, like nutrient dense foods. We have like massage, yoga, meditation, tons of therapy, tons of like peer support, and like a really intense effort at getting you plugged in with great guides for recovery after you leave.
That's great.
So we're trying to think holistically about recovery from addiction. The second thing that we do a lot of work on is highly personalized, in-depth psychological assessment. So many people will be in recovery and they'll relapse, they'll gain sobriety, they'll make another try, and for some reason something's not working. Mm-hmm. Like they're kind of stuck in the cycle. Another common story is someone used like marijuana with their Adderall, and they wound up in a psychiatric hospital for like what looks like paranoia. And then the question is like, is this substance induced or is this organic? What's the diagnosis and like what's the recommended treatment? And in our world that focuses on disease management, like you'll get many patients will get involved in these situations where they're just using their insurance to pay people to do things, but there's not a deep understanding of like what's the root cause. Yeah. And based on where I want my life to be in 6 to 12 months, what are the 5 most important things for me to do tomorrow? Right. So like that's a very different question to answer. Yeah. And we love a challenge. So like we love diving deep into your history. We love bringing like tons of objective and subjective measures to completely put everything under a microscope and then take all of these microscope pictures and put together like the big picture. Yeah. And find out, okay, these are the 5 things that would be the most impactful for you to do.
I love that because it really mirrors what we do here in so many ways. Like it's for us, and it's funny because just an hour ago we had somebody come in for the first time, and I asked her, "So what made you decide to come in now with all these things going on with you?" And she said that when I went to your website, you wrote down that you guys look for the root cause. Because I've been to other PTs, I've been to orthos, I've been to everyone around the block, and no one seems to be able to nail down what I have. And I'm just excited to learn more about what are the things that I can do and be empowered to do to get out of this phase, because I just want to live my life and just do the things I love to do. Yeah. And I was like, you're in the right place, son. So it sounds like you're in the, for you, it's the same kind of thing at New Waters, which is great.
Yeah, totally. We had this one client, and she was in this pattern of like drinking, like just to the point of almost dying. Wow. And then going to the hospital, drying out, and then being set out, and just rinse and repeat. And like this time they came in and like they were starting to show jaundice. I mean, it was like very serious. Like the liver is like scarring permanently. And so there's an assessment client, and we were trying to understand, like, you know, what is alcohol like? So in like classical Greek philosophy, there's like the most important book in my opinion for understanding ethics is this book by Aristotle called the Nicomachean Ethics. And one of the first lines in that book is the end of all action is the good. Okay. And so everyone is trying to do something helpful for themselves in everything they choose, even when it's something like using crack or getting completely stoned or drinking their liver to death. Yeah. It actually has in that moment of the choice, they think they're doing something right for themselves. And it turns out like this client, it was really intense anxiety, like just crippling anxiety. And we went into the history, and it's like, can you tell me about when you remember being anxious? And she told the story about growing up in Texas, and their house was kind of unusual because it had, not only did it have a lawn, it had like a circle of dirt going around the house. And I asked, and they explained, as a kid, like both of her parents drank so much that they were incapacitated as parents. And he's 5 years old, and he has like a 3-year-old sibling, and they're both hungry.
Oh, man.
And they don't know what to do. So the way that she would deal with the anxiety is just walk around the house.
Oh, my gosh.
And she spent so much time worrying about the anxiety that she killed the grass and created like a path around the house because she walked it like every day.
Wow.
And, as therapists, typically we try not to like get too emotional, but I was like gutted. Because it's like the sweetest person sitting in front of me, and I'm thinking about my kids, and they're hungry, and we make them dinner, it's like fundamentals.
Yes.
And I was just thinking about my kids being hungry and like walking around the house because they don't know like how to wake up mom and dad, and I was like just terrified for this person, and I said like you deserved to have food. Like you deserve to have parents like that took care of you. I'm so sorry that this happened to you. And, at this point we're both crying.
Yeah.
I kind of pull myself together, and then, he kind of has, and she has her moment. And, that person's gone on to have like a very different understanding. Right? Like, okay, my anxieties are legitimate, right? Like I have these needs that need to be met.
Yeah.
I grew up as a child not seeing anybody meet my needs. And as an adult, like for the first time, like someone's telling me like, it's okay for me to take care of my own needs because I deserve it.
Yeah. That's powerful.
Yeah. So, all those lectures about like, this is why you shouldn't drink. It's not the right approach for this person.
Yeah.
Right. Because they have an intense anxiety that needs to be met in some way.
So in that case, Harold, that could actually be more danger for somebody who is using alcohol for something they think is doing right for themselves.
Yeah. I mean, it actually reminds me of a really a surprisingly common side effect of gastric bypass surgery is alcoholism.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yes. Because people who are used to being emotional eaters can no longer emotionally eat.
Oh my God. So they find something else.
So but they have, it only takes a certain volume of alcohol to feel that sense of like disconnection from your stress. And so there's a surprisingly like higher than you would expect prevalence of developing an alcohol use disorder after a gastric bypass.
Oh my gosh, that's crazy.
Yeah. So, if you have an anxiety that has to be met through a substance or a process, and you take away one, like something else will fill that gap.
For sure.
Until you have an emotional maturation moment and understand that actually there's like a better way to solve this.
That's great work that you guys are doing over there at New Waters.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you.
Let's talk about how, and this is what really intrigued me about our conversation initially, Harold, which was that although medicine can, or different kinds of things can provide a window of opportunity for people who are addicted to certain kinds of things, the way that you have been able to take it for yourself as a professional has been, why don't we incorporate things like exercise and fitness into the lifestyle of these people? Because we know that the longer term benefits are there, and we know that endogenously, at least inside our bodies, we can produce the right kinds of chemicals to produce the desired effects of either satiety or just feeling well about yourself, and that sort of thing.
Yeah. So like, what's the role of medicine, or what's the role of exercise, or like, how do you think about it? Like how do I think about this as a prescriber?
Exactly.
Yeah, it's a great question. So like in general, I would say a healthy way to think about medicine is health is using the least amount of medicine necessary. And which is not to say do not use medicine. It's use the least amount needed. So some people need medicines to control their blood pressure. Like some people need medicines to treat something like schizophrenia, right? Like it's just necessary. Like they'll be much less healthy without the medication. So in those situations, like, yes, like let's use these medications. But then curiously, there are other situations where there are things that are better than medicine, right? So like a really common thing that I see is using benzodiazepines for anxiety or using benzodiazepines for sleep. And the curious thing about this is those medications, they actually weaken the parts of your brain that are responsible for managing anxiety, and they weaken parts of your brain that are necessary for regulating sleep. It's like a crutch, right?
It really is.
And so then you become physically dependent on these medications, and over time you develop a resistance and you need more medication to just maintain balance.
Which wrecks those parts of your brain even more.
Yeah, right, exactly. So that would be a good example of like a medicine you're clearly better off like not taking. So like a very common phrase in healthcare is like the cure is worse than the disease.
Yeah.
Right. So this is certainly one of those situations. And then like when it comes to antidepressants, this is like a pretty hot button issue. I think there's something of an elephant in the room when it comes to the role of antidepressants. Because when you look at the clinical trials of the efficacy of an antidepressant, like what you will always see is a placebo group and an intervention group, right? So one group gets a sugar pill, one group gets the real medication. And curiously, both groups improve. And the only time that a medication gets FDA approved is if it's statistically significantly superior to the placebo. But the placebo group has improved like significantly. And so it's actually like really hard to find a medicine for depression and anxiety that's superior to placebo.
Yeah.
And then what we've found is when you've done, there's a recent meta-analysis of the effect of exercise on mood. And this delta that we're talking about, that's called the effect size.
Yeah.
Okay. And what they've found is that like the effect size of regular exercise on mood is equivalent to, and in many cases superior to that of medications for depression and anxiety.
Interesting.
Yeah. And it's really interesting because if that same study came out and it said that like new medicine Y is this much superior in effect size to all other antidepressants, it would create almost like a medical legal necessity to make that the first thing you talk about with a patient.
Oh my
right?
gosh,
Like
yeah.
if I don't put the best option first, like that's actually in some ways negligent on my part, right? Like why should I put like the third line most side effect option first?
Yeah.
Like why not offer the best thing first? So it creates a necessity to make that the first recommendation. So it's kind of curious to me that we know from many different perspectives that exercise is so highly potent and effective for the treatment of mental health disorders, but it hardly ever gets discussed.
Why is that? Is that
I think it's
in the medical community? It's just not.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of things that, like culturally, to a prescriber, a prescription is how we work, and we prescribe medications, right?
Yeah.
So a lot of times, like the patient is coming in expecting a prescription for a medication, and as providers, we're just kind of psychologically, culturally trained to prescribe a medication. So there's a lot of cultural momentum, right, to overcome in that instance. And I think the other piece is actually like exercise. It can be tricky, or it can be really simple. But like if someone comes in and says like, "Hey, I want to get fit," you and your expertise will know exactly how to break it down and find the right way for them to start. But physicians are simply not trained in how to prescribe exercise. Right? So like
It's almost more dangerous in some ways.
well, I don't like
or not as effective.
Yeah, I mean, like it's so if I have a patient who's like 300 pounds and they're like 5'5", and I tell them to exercise, they will scoff. Right. Right. Because when I say exercise, they think like, oh, you want me to like go run a mile?
Right.
Like I would die.
Right? Just give me the pill.
Right?
That's a
Like,
lot
I would
easier.
die. Yeah. But like what I would tell them in my novice level of understanding exercise physiology, be like, I would just walk. Like I would get an Apple Watch. I would find your zones, and I would go in zone 2 for 30 minutes, 4 to 5 times a week.
Yeah.
That's where I would start.
Yeah.
And they'll be like, that's not exercising. Right. And like they might feel embarrassed like going to the gym and there's like all these people like, running like 8-minute mile pace and they're like walking like 2.5 mile pace.
So there are more barriers in some sense than just getting a pill.
Totally.
Yeah. I see that.
Yeah. And it's a lifestyle change, right? So, and a lot of people might think like, oh, like I'm embarrassed to go to the gym.
Right.
I don't fit in. So you can get into self-esteem issues.
Yeah.
So without like a culture that embraces exercise as a therapy, it's quite an uphill battle.
Man. So it almost seems to me like from a messaging perspective that if I wanted to make exercise a centerpiece of my treatment protocol for depression, I would have to sort of say that, hey, if you've tried antidepressants or you don't want to go that route of medication, here's another way that you can actually go that route so that that person knows exactly what they're coming in. Oh, these people know how to exercise somebody with depression so that they can get the benefits, which might be more beneficial than taking the medication itself.
Yeah. I mean, I think like in a really sound treatment planning conversation, I would say like, here's option 1, here's option 2, maybe option 3. And let's talk about the pros and cons for each one. And you make your own choice about which way to go. Like this is like in a theoretically perfect treatment planning conversation, this is what happens, right? So like we're supposed to obtain informed consent, which means you understand the risks, benefits, and alternatives of the intervention that I'm prescribing. And I mean, it's really interesting because if I told someone like option 1 is exercise, it is like almost like a magic medicine that will improve your cardiovascular health, longevity, like your quality of life, your quantity of life. You'll have more energy, you'll sleep better, you'll think more clearly, your mood will improve, and there are essentially no side effects.
Yeah.
Okay.
Option 2.
Right. Yeah. Okay. And option 2 is you will go to the pharmacy. You can take this antidepressant. Over the next 8 weeks, it may improve your mood, but you should watch out for dry mouth, like sexual dysfunction, changes in your level of like orientation. You might feel sleepy. You might gain a lot of weight on this medication. And you might like actually start to think about suicide. Like, that's like a black box warning on antidepressants. But like statistically for the population to take this medication, their mood improves. Okay. And then option 3 is like, you could, do some like somatic therapy. It's like, if you've already been on multiple medication trials, you could try electroconvulsive therapy or transcranial magnetic stimulation or ketamine.
Wow.
Right. And those are like really intensive therapies that like require like a lot of planning and a lot of support to engage in. Which one do you want to go for?
Exactly. Oh, man. For me, obviously option 1, but I mean, it just seems like the one that's,
Yeah, but it's funny because like every time I've had this conversation with people, like no one's picked exercise.
No way.
Yeah.
Are you serious?
Totally, 100%.
It seems obvious to me as a...
No, they're like they come up with a story about why exercise is not realistic for them.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And that's regardless of whether they're overweight or whatnot. There's some sort of story that creates a barrier.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. One of the most common things is like I have chronic pain, which is funny, right? Because like actually people with chronic pain tend to do better with exercise.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. In fact, it's probably the mainstay of any of our clients with chronic pain is that
Yeah.
You've got to actually extinguish that
Yeah.
connection to the brain. So
Yeah, and your inactivity may be a fundamental cause of the
Yes.
pain that you're in.
Absolutely.
Yeah, like for me, I've dealt with like chronic back pain, and I got curious about strength training, and I got into starting strength with Mark Ripito,
Yes.
and I remember like getting in front of the deadlift for the first time, and I was scared. I was like, this is a horrible idea. Like, how is putting all this strain on my axial loading in any way a good idea? Like, this is good. I might not walk again. Is like literally what I'm thinking.
Wow.
Right. But like now that I'm like several months into the starting strength program, I'm like not afraid to lift heavy things because I know how to lift heavy things, and I've fixed a lot of the weaknesses that put my spine at risk.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, it took like tons of research and like learning from other experts to tell me, like, actually, this is the cure.
That's a great story. I love that. It's funny because first of all, it surprises me that most people wouldn't choose that option for exercise still. So I'm still baking.
I've yet to have a single person pick it.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
I would not have thought that actually.
I know. I maybe they need like a different person to talk about it, but I think it's for a lot of people it's overwhelming. Like looking here at your studio, like this is like a good place for people to work out, right? Like I think people would benefit from having a barbell or like some kettlebells, but a lot of people they wouldn't know like where to even begin.
Exactly. So there's that fear and uncertainty too of how to do it right, and then that feeds into their story of why they shouldn't be exercising. Yeah.
So I mean, their reasons are like I think like naive but convincing.
Yes, for sure. Yeah, that's crazy. For any, I guess, clients who you have, once you take them through that process at New Waters, they eventually will go into these other somatic therapies you've talked about that might be helpful too. And it sounds like exercise then is more introduced at that point, or it can be something where they're more receptive to that.
Yeah. So for our goal for most clients is to get them to a 30-day residential.
Yeah.
So like in a 30-day residential, you have the safety and the space and just like the focus to like make the main thing the main thing. And so some people at the clinic are like, they come in and like, they work out and like they work out, but in some ways I think like excessively, right?
So another addiction for an replacement.
Right. Yeah. Right. And then a lot of other people will just kind of go back to like, a rather sedentary, ordinary American lifestyle. But like, interestingly, the one thing that really does line up for people in terms of like increasing their physical activity is being out in nature, right? So like going on hikes, going camping, going paddling, going fishing. So like whenever we can find that intersection of recovery, spirituality, and physical activity with connection with nature, we just like pile on and say like, go for it.
Yeah. Like
we know these guides here, like there's these like, PT centers there. There's like a great CrossFit gym, in the city. So let's do it.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Harold, thank you so much for coming on our show and learning more about New Waters, but also your journey has been really kind of cool. And I'm really looking forward to doing things with New Waters in the future too, to see how we can be a part of the healing community that you already have. Yeah, it's been awesome. Thanks, Jerry. Yep. Thanks so much for tuning into today's episode. It really does mean a lot to us. And don't forget to like, share, subscribe, or comment if you got at least one or two helpful insights or takeaways to help you get to your next level.